For 20 years, she wrote down names no one was supposed to question. Not in public records, not in church books, not in official documents, but in her own leather-bound ledger, hidden beneath loose floorboards in a quiet farmhouse bedroom. And when that book was finally discovered, an entire dynasty began to fall. It started in 1898 in a small American town where everyone believed they knew each other. The Whitmore family owned half the land. Their name was carved into the courthouse entrance. Their donations built the church. Their influence reached beyond the town limits. If you needed a loan, you went to Whitmore Bank. If you wanted work, you worked their fields. If you had trouble, you hoped they never heard about it. And then there was Eleanor Hale. She wasn't powerful, she wasn't wealthy, she wasn't feared. She was the town's midwife. Eleanor had steady hands, calm eyes, a voice that made frightened mothers breathe easier. For years, she walked into homes at midnight, in snowstorms, through summer heat. She delivered babies into the world and placed them gently into waiting arms. She never asked questions. At least, not out loud. But she noticed things. She noticed how some babies were taken away too quickly. She noticed how certain mothers were told to stay quiet. She noticed how the Whitmore carriage would sometimes arrive before sunrise and leave with a child no one spoke of again. The first time it happened, she told herself it was none of her business. The second time, she felt something twist in her chest. By the third time, she began writing. Not official notes. Personal ones. Date, time, mother's name, father's name if known, and a final column she titled, Removed. She didn't plan to expose anyone. She simply couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. Years passed. The ledger filled slowly. Some entries were ordinary, happy, clean. Others were different. Young housemaids giving birth in silence. Daughters of poor farmers whose babies vanished before dawn. Whispers of arrangements, made quietly in the Whitmore study, and always the same pattern, a birth, a payment, a disappearance. Eleanor kept delivering babies. She kept smiling politely at church. She kept her ledger hidden beneath the floorboards. And she waited. She wasn't waiting for revenge. She was waiting for the truth to matter. 20 years is a long time to carry a secret. Her hair turned silver. Her hands grew thinner. The Whitmore empire grew larger, new factories, new land, political connections in the state capital. They were untouchable. Until the winter of 1918, it was the coldest winter anyone could remember. Snow buried fences. Roads disappeared. The town moved slower. That was when Clara Whitmore returned home. Clara was the youngest daughter of Henry Whitmore, educated in Boston, sharp-minded, observant. She didn't believe everything her father told her, and she asked too many questions. One evening, Clara visited Eleanor under the excuse of delivering coal and supplies. The town respected Eleanor. Even the Whitmores couldn't openly dismiss her. They sat by the fireplace. Tea cooled between them. Clara's voice was soft. "Miss Hale, how many babies have you delivered?" Eleanor paused. "Hundreds," she said gently. "And have you ever—" Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Noticed anything unusual?" Eleanor looked into the fire. For 20 years, she had remained silent, but silence grows heavier with age. "Yes," she said finally. Clara didn't flinch. "Can you prove it?" That night, for the first time, Eleanor lifted the loose floorboard. She placed the leather ledger on the kitchen table. Clara turned each page slowly. Her breathing changed. "These names," she whispered. "They're real," Eleanor replied. "And some of those children," Clara swallowed. "They were claimed as Whitmore heirs." The room felt smaller, because suddenly, this wasn't about scandal. It was about identity, power, inheritance. If the records were true, several prominent Whitmore descendants were not biologically Whitmores at all. They were children taken from vulnerable mothers, rebranded, absorbed into wealth, and the real mothers were paid to disappear. Clara closed the book carefully. "This could destroy us," she said. Eleanor's eyes were steady. "The truth doesn't destroy," she replied quietly. "It reveals." Within weeks, whispers began spreading beyond town limits. Clara had copied the records. She sent them to a journalist in Chicago, a man known for exposing industrial corruption. The first article was cautious. The second was direct. By the third, the story exploded. Headlines questioned the legitimacy of Whitmore heirs. Lawyers demanded investigations. Former servants came forward with testimonies. The dynasty that once felt untouchable began cracking under scrutiny. Henry Whitmore denied everything. He called Eleanor a senile woman seeking attention. He called Clara knave. But evidence is patient. Birth dates aligned too perfectly. Financial records show and explain payments to families listed in Eleanor's ledger. And then, something unexpected happened. A man in his 30s stepped forward after reading the newspaper series. His name was Samuel Reed. He had grown up in a neighboring county, adopted by distant relatives. He always suspected something didn't add up about his origins. His birth date matched one of Eleanor's entries. Removed, Samuel traveled to the town himself. He stood in Eleanor's kitchen, holding the ledger with trembling hands. "My mother's name," he said quietly. "It's here." Eleanor nodded. "Yes." "And the father listed." He swallowed. "Henry Whitmore." The silence that followed felt like history shifting, because now this wasn't rumor. It was blood. Lawsuits followed. State investigators arrived. The Whitmore estate, once lively with guests and power meetings, became guarded and tense. Clara stood publicly by the truth. She testified. She admitted her own doubts about her family's past. The town was divided. Some believed Eleanor was a hero. Others called her a traitor who should have stayed quiet. But Eleanor never celebrated. She simply continued delivering babies, because new life still arrived, no matter how corrupted old power became. In 1920, the court ruled that several inheritance claims were invalid. Properties were redistributed. Financial penalties crippled the Whitmore empire. They didn't disappear overnight, but they were never powerful again. And in a quiet farmhouse bedroom, beneath repaired floorboards, the original ledger remained, not as a weapon, not as revenge, but as proof that one quiet woman, armed only with ink and courage, could outlast a dynasty built on secrets. Years later, when Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, the town gathered for her funeral. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just mothers, fathers, and grown children she once delivered into trembling hands. Among them stood Samuel Reed and Clara Whitmore, two lives forever altered by the truth she chose to record. Because sometimes history isn't changed by kings, it isn't changed by armies, it's changed by someone who refuses to look away. For 20 years, she guarded a hidden record. And when the world was finally ready to hear it, a dynasty began to fall. The ledger was never supposed to be found. It wasn't hidden in a vault. It wasn't locked in a safe. It sat quietly on a dusty shelf in the back room of a funeral home, wrapped in plain brown paper, labeled only with a year. No one questioned it, until a grandson cleaning out the property decided to open it. And with that single decision, a powerful family's history began to unravel. The Carter family had been respected in Millfield, Ohio for nearly a century. They owned the largest funeral service in the county. 3 generations of Carters handled burials, wills, and private family matters. They knew who owed money. They knew who fought behind closed doors. They knew who had secrets. And in a small town, knowledge is power. By the 1950s, the Carter name meant stability, trust, discretion. If something needed to stay quiet, you called them. But long before the polished hearse and manicured lawns, there was Thomas Carter. He founded the funeral business in 1898 after returning from the Spanish-American War. People said the war changed him, made him quieter, observant. He believed in documentation. Every body that entered his care was recorded, name, date of death, family contact, 'cause simple, professional. But in 1912, something shifted. The official records remained clean. The unofficial ledger did not. The first unusual entry appeared in March of that year. Female infant, no name given. Delivered at private residence, transferred before sunrise, no burial location listed. Thomas underlined the final note twice. Transferred to Whittaker residence, The Whitakers were one of the wealthiest families in Millfield at the time. Industrial investors, railroad stockholders, political donors. They had suffered several miscarriages. Then suddenly, they had a healthy baby girl. The town celebrated their miracle. No one asked questions, except Thomas. He had prepared the small, wooden coffin for that unnamed infant. He remembered the weight, the stillness. But that child had not been buried. She had been moved, paid for in cash, and the grieving mother. Her name never appeared in church records again. Thomas began keeping the second ledger that night, not to accuse, not to expose, but because something felt wrong, and wrong things should be remembered. Over the next 6 years, the pattern repeated. Stillborn children, infants declared weak, mothers from poor families, and always a transfer, always to a household with influence. The Whitakers, the Montgomery estate, the Hale Ranch, families desperate for heirs, families with money, families whose public image could not survive scandal. Thomas never confronted them. He wasn't a wealthy man. He had a wife, a son, a small business. Powerful people do not respond kindly to accusations. So he documented, carefully, quietly. Dates aligned with sudden, miracle adoptions. Payments matched unusual deposits in his funeral accounts. The ledger grew heavier with each entry. By 1918, the practice slowed. The war changed priorities. Influenza swept through the country. Death was no longer discreet, it was everywhere, and the quiet transfers stopped. Thomas sealed the ledger in brown paper and placed it on the shelf behind old tax receipts. He never told his son about it. Some truths, he believed, were safer buried. Decades passed. The Carter Funeral Home flourished. Thomas died peacefully in 1942. His son inherited the business. Then his grandson, Michael Carter, took over in the 1980s. By then, the Whitakers were political royalty in Ohio. Judges, senators, donors to universities. Their family portrait hung in the courthouse lobby, and no one remembered 1912 until 2023. Michael was 71 when he decided to retire. His grandson, Daniel, helped clean the old storage room behind the embalming area. Boxes stacked high, papers brittle with age. Daniel found the wrapped ledger behind a warped shelf. "Grandpa, what's this?" Michael shrugged. "Probably old accounts." They almost tossed it into the donation pile. Almost. And Daniel unwrapped it and began reading. At first, it seemed ordinary. Death records, infant losses, small-town tragedy. Then he noticed something strange. Several entries had no burial plot listed. Transferred. 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 He cross-checked one of the names, Whitaker. The birth date matched the birthday of Margaret Whitaker, the current state senator's grandmother. But official family biographies claimed Margaret was born at home healthy, celebrated. The ledger said otherwise. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He spent 3 nights reviewing the book. Each time, the pattern became clearer. Infants declared deceased appearing weeks later in wealthy households as adopted children. Poor mothers disappearing from town shortly after. He showed Michael. The old man's hands trembled. "I never knew about this," Michael whispered. "My father never mentioned it." But the handwriting was unmistakably Thomas Carter's, and the signatures from wealthy estates acknowledging private arrangements were still legible. The question wasn't whether it was real. The question was what to do with it. Daniel believed in transparency. He had grown up in a digital world. Records mattered. Truth mattered. Michael believed in survival. "You don't challenge families like that," he warned. "They'll bury us." But Daniel couldn't ignore what he'd read. These weren't legal adoptions. They were silent transactions. Infants declared dead to erase scandal. Purchased to secure inheritance lines. Identity rewritten for status. He contacted a local investigative journalist, anonymously at first. Within weeks, the story reached a regional news outlet. They verified 2 cases independently. Birth certificates altered. Hospital logs inconsistent. Financial transfers aligning with ledger dates. The headline ran on a Sunday morning. Historic adoption scandal linked to prominent Ohio family. The Whitakers immediately denied everything. They called the ledger fabricated. They called it a desperate attempt for attention. But documentation is stubborn. DNA testing was requested by relatives curious about their lineage. Results came back quietly and devastatingly. Two prominent Whittaker descendants were not biologically related to the original patriarch. The revelation didn't just embarrass the family. It threatened inheritance claims worth millions. Property trusts depended on bloodline legitimacy. Political opponents seized the story. Talk shows debated morality. Millfield, once quiet, became a media swarm. And the Carter Funeral Home, the place built on discretion, became ground zero. Daniel never expected the backlash. Online harassment, anonymous letters, boycotts. Some townspeople supported him. Others accused him of dishonoring history. But something unexpected happened. An elderly woman named Ruth approached the funeral home one afternoon. She had read the article. Her birth year matched a ledger entry. Declared deceased in 1916. Transferred to Montgomery Estate. Ruth had always suspected she was adopted. Her parents refused to speak about her origins. With trembling hands, she agreed to a DNA test. The results connected her to a farming family 2 counties away, a family that lost a baby girl in 1950s and never received a burial. Ruth met her biological niece at age 107. They held hands in a hospital room, both crying quietly. For the first time in a century, a stolen story had been corrected, and that moment changed public opinion. This wasn't about destroying powerful families. It was about restoring identities. One by one, more cases surfaced. Not dozens, not hundreds, but enough to confirm that in the early 1900s, wealth had quietly rewritten bloodlines. The Whittakers survived legally. The statute of limitations had long passed. But socially, their reputation shifted forever. Trust eroded. Political careers stalled. Their name no longer symbolized untouchable power. It symbolized hidden history. As for the Carter family, business slowed at first. Then something remarkable happened. People began choosing them again, not for silence, but for integrity. Because in a world where secrets protected the powerful, someone had chosen to reveal them. And it started with a ledger no one was meant to see. Years later, Daniel framed a copy of one page, not the names, not the scandal, but Thomas Carter's simple handwritten line at the bottom of the final entry. Truth deserves ink. He hung it in the back office, not as a trophy, not as revenge, but as a reminder. Power can rewrite documents. It can buy silence. It can control narratives. But somewhere someone is writing it down, and one day, that record may change everything. If you're ready, we move to Structure of 83, and it will go even darker. She stayed silent for 20 years. Then her notes shattered an empire. Full cinematic script, simple, natural English, U.S. audience tone, real emotion, strong pacing, killer hook, no robotic feel. Let's begin. For 20 years, she said nothing. She attended their parties. She accepted their donations. She smiled when their carriages passed her small white house. And every Sunday, she sat 3 pews behind them in church. Hands folded, eyes lowered, as if she didn't know what they had done. But she knew, because she had written it down. And when she finally stopped staying silent, an empire shattered. In 1901, Blackridge was a growing steel town in Pennsylvania. Smokestacks lined the horizon, train tracks split the town in two. On one side, workers, boarding houses, laundry lines. On the other, the Harrington estate. The Harringtons owned the mills. They owned the rail contracts. They owned the mayor. If steel moved through Blackridge, money flowed to them. And if something went wrong in Blackridge, it disappeared quietly. Margaret Doyle arrived in town at 24. She had lost her fiancé in a factory accident 2 years earlier and needed work. She found it as a clerk in Harrington Textile's payroll office. Her job was simple. Type employee records, file injury reports, process compensation payments. But in her second month, she noticed something strange. The accident reports didn't match the hospital logs. Men declared dead on paper were listed as transferred in private memos. Families received small payouts, far less than promised by company policy. And some families received nothing. Margaret assumed it was a mistake, until she overheard a conversation She was delivering payroll summaries to the second-floor office when she heard Mr. Charles Harrington speaking sharply behind closed doors. "Move him to the outside contractor list," he said. "If he's not officially ours, we're not liable." A pause. "And make sure the widow signs before she understands the clause." Margaret froze in the hallway. Her heart pounded, because she had processed that file that morning. Thomas Bell, crushed in a machinery collapse. On paper, he was still an active Harrington employee. But by the time his body reached the hospital, he had been reclassified, outside contractor, no benefits, no compensation. Margaret returned to her desk that afternoon and quietly made a second copy of the payroll file. She didn't know why. She just knew she couldn't ignore it. That was the first page in her notebook. Over the next 20 years, she built a record. Not a dramatic journal, not angry letters, just facts, dates, names, original classifications, revised classifications, injury reports altered after signatures, safety violations erased before inspections, payments rerouted through shell vendors. Margaret never confronted anyone. She kept her job. She attended company picnics. She even typed condolence letters signed by Charles Harrington himself. "Deepest sympathies for your tragic loss." She typed the words while knowing the loss had been preventable and profitable. Every year, the Harrington empire grew. New mills, political allies, a seat in the state senate. They funded schools, built libraries, sponsored parades. The town praised them. Margaret remained silent, because silence kept her safe. But silence also kept her awake at night. She watched widows take in laundry to survive. She watched children leave school to work in the same mills that killed their fathers. And she wrote it down. Not because she believed she could stop it, but because someone should remember it correctly. In 1921, an explosion tore through Mill 3. 6 men died instantly. 11 were critically injured. The official statement blamed faulty coal delivery. Margaret knew better. She had typed 3 internal warnings about cracked pressure valves weeks earlier. Each warning had been marked, resolved. They had not been resolved. They had been ignored. And for the first time in 20 years, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. She was tired of watching the truth rewritten. That night, she opened her notebook and counted. 70, 2 altered cases. 70, 2 families missiled. 70, 2 times she chose silence. The number felt heavier than the book itself. Around that time, a young journalist named David Mercer arrived in Blackridge. He worked for a Pittsburgh newspaper known for exposing corporate corruption. He began asking questions about the explosion. Most people avoided him. But word travels quietly in small towns. And one evening, Margaret found a note slipped under her door. "If you know something, meet me Sunday, 8 p.m. by the rail yard." She stared at the paper for a long time. 20 years of silence pressed against her chest. Then she reached beneath her bed and pulled out the notebook. She didn't sleep that night. The rail yard was empty, except for a flickering lamp near the freight cars. David Mercer stood waiting, coat collar turned up against the wind. "You wrote to me?" Margaret asked carefully. "No," he replied. "But someone thinks you know the payroll system." She studied him. Young, determined, not yet worn down by power. She handed him the notebook. "Read," she said quietly. He flipped through the pages under the dim light. His breathing changed. "These are company records," he whispered. "They were," Margaret corrected, "before they were changed." For the first time in 20 years, she said the truth out loud. "They killed men to protect profit," she said. "And they erased it." David looked up slowly. "Are you prepared for what happens if this is published?" Margaret thought about her small house, her steady paycheck, her safety. Then she thought about Thomas Bell's widow. "Yes," she said. The first article ran 2 weeks later. Internal documents suggest cover, up in Harrington Mill explosion. The Harrington family dismissed it as speculation. Then David published scanned copies of original payroll classifications, matched against Margaret's preserved versions. The differences were undeniable. Public outrage grew. State investigators arrived. Former employees came forward. Margaret testified under oath. She was calm, clear, precise. She did not exaggerate. She simply read from her notes: date, name, original status, altered status. One by one, the courtroom grew silent, because empires depend on reputation, and reputation depends on trust. By the end of the investigation, the Harrington Steel Corporation faced criminal charges for negligence and fraud. Stock prices collapsed. Political allies distanced themselves. Charles Harrington resigned from his Senate position. The mills did not close. But the empire was no longer untouchable. It had cracked, and everyone knew why. Margaret lost her job. Her house was vandalized. She received threats in the mail. But something unexpected happened. The widows she once watched struggle began leaving food on her porch. Workers tipped their hats when she passed. The town slowly shifted. Not overnight, but steadily. Because when someone finally speaks after 20 years of silence, people listen differently. Margaret never considered herself brave. She considered herself late. "Why did you wait so long?" a reporter once asked her. She answered honestly, "I was afraid," she said. And fear is powerful. But so is record. She lived quietly after that. No fame, no fortune. Just a small garden, a modest home, and the knowledge that the truth she protected had finally been heard. Years later, when she passed away, David Mercer attended her funeral. He placed her original notebook inside the casket beside her hands. Because some records are not meant for museums. They are meant to remind us that power can roar, but quiet persistence can outlast it. For 20 years, she stayed silent. She typed their lies. She filed their revisions. She watched their empire rise on rewritten truth. But she never stopped writing the real version. And when the world was finally ready to hear it, her notes shattered an empire. The day her secret records were a legacy collapsed. Full cinematic script. Modern setting, faster pacing, psychological tension, natural, human tone, U.S. audience, engaging from the first second. Let's begin. The box was never meant to be opened. It had been sitting in the attic for years, maybe decades, sealed with brittle tape, covered in dust thick enough to hide its label. If the house hadn't been sold, it would have stayed there. If the new owners hadn't decided to renovate, it would have remained untouched. If Emily Harper hadn't climbed those attic stairs that afternoon, an entire family legacy would still be intact. But she did. And by sunset, everything began to collapse. The Whitlock family was old money in Savannah, Georgia. Not flashy wealth, not celebrity wealth, quiet wealth, real estate, shipping contracts, political connections stretching back to the 1940s. Their name appeared on hospital wings, art museum plaques, scholarship funds. They weren't loud about power. They didn't need to be. Everyone already knew. The house Emily was renovating belonged to Margaret Whitlock, the family matriarch who had passed away at 93. The estate sale had been discreet, no public listings. Private buyers only. That Emily didn't care about the family history. She cared about restoring old homes, original wood, hand-carved railings, hidden details waiting to breathe again. That's why she went into the attic herself. That's why she found the box. It was tucked behind insulation, near the chimney base. Plain cardboard. No markings except a faded line in pens. Personal. Do not discard. Emily almost respected that. Almost. Renovation rules are simple. Everything must be inspected. She carried it downstairs, wiped away the dust, and cut the tape. Inside were notebooks. 5 of them. Black leather covers cracked with age. And beneath them, a thick envelope labeled Property Transfers 1962-1978. Emily's first instinct was curiosity. Her second was hesitation. Private journals weren't meant to be read, but something about the envelope felt official. She opened that first. Inside were copies of deeds, land transfers, property ownership changes, all signed by Margaret Whitlock, all involving small parcels of land around the River District, and all purchased far below market value. That wasn't illegal, just aggressive business. Then she opened the first notebook. The handwriting was elegant, controlled. January 14, 1963. Met with the Harris family today. They agreed to vacate quietly. Compensation accepted. Emily frowned. Vacate quietly. She flipped forward. March 2, 1964. City Zoning Board confirmed approval after donation was finalized. Demolition scheduled. Page after page. Addresses, meetings, payments, and a phrase repeated often. No press involvement. Emily sat back slowly. Because she knew the River District. She had just walked through it last week. Luxury condos, boutique shops, upscale restaurants, prime real estate. And according to the dates in the notebook, those properties once belonged to working-class families. Families who disappeared from city records shortly after selling. Emily wasn't an investigator. She was a contractor. But something didn't sit right. She cross-checked one address from the notebook, 1965, Harris family. She searched city archives online. The home had been condemned due to structural instability. But the notebook entry from Margaret said, inspection delayed until relocation secured. That wasn't condemnation. That was manipulation. Emily's chest tightened. Because this wasn't just business strategy, it was coordination. Pressure, influence. The Whitlock legacy, the museums, the hospitals, the scholarships may have been built on forced displacement, and no one knew. Or maybe they did. But without proof, it was just rumor. Until now, she closed the notebook and stared at the envelope again. Property transfers 1962-1978. That period matched the Whitlock's biggest financial growth. Riverfront expansion, shipping dominance, political ascent. It all began after those quiet relocations. Emily felt the weight of the decision forming. She could hand the box to the estate lawyer and walk away. She could pretend she never opened it. Or she could do something that would put her directly in the path of a very powerful family. She called her. Daniel Harper was a reporter in Atlanta. Investigative desk. Relentless. She didn't explain everything on the phone. She just said, I found something. He drove down that night. They sat at the kitchen table under warm pendant lights. Daniel flipped through the notebooks slowly. His expression changed page by page. This isn't just relocation, he said quietly. This is coordinated removal. He pointed to a specific entry. Look at this. Same zoning board member appears 3 times after donations. Emily swallowed. You think it's criminal? Think it's systemic, Daniel replied. He photographed every page, every deed, every signature. Because if something happened to the originals, digital copies would survive. The article published 2 months later. Historic riverfront development tied to forced relocations. The Whitlock family responded immediately. Denial. Outrage. Legal threats. They called the notebooks personal reflections taken out of context. They claimed the land purchases were voluntary. But then former residents came forward. An elderly man named Robert Harris, son of the original Harris family listed in the notebook, recognized his parents' names in the article. They told us the house wasn't safe. He said in an interview, they gave us 2 weeks. 2 weeks? For a family home built over 3 generations. More testimonies followed. Pressure from inspectors. Sudden tax reassessments. Bank loan denials immediately before sale agreements. Patterns formed. The notebooks weren't exaggerations. They were confirmations. Public opinion shifted quickly. Savannah City Council launched an inquiry. Old zoning board members were questioned. Financial records resurfaced. The Whitlock Foundation, once praised for philanthropy, faced scrutiny over the origin of its funding. Because charity built on coercion feels different once exposed, Margaret Whitlock had died peacefully, celebrated as a civic leader. But her private records told another story, a strategic one. Calculated, cold. The collapse wasn't dramatic. There were no arrests at first. No dramatic court scenes. It was slower than that. Donations were paused. Museum wings removed the Whitlock name. University scholarships were reviewed. Investors stepped back. Legacy doesn't collapse in a single moment. It erodes, piece by piece. And it began the day a dusty attic box was opened. Emily never wanted attention. Reporters showed up at the renovation site. Neighbors whispered. Some praised her courage. Others called her reckless. You could have sold that house quietly, someone told her. Why get involved? She answered honestly. Because it was already involved. I just found the proof. The house renovation continued. Original wood floors restored, walls repainted. But one thing changed. The attic space remained untouched, not as storage, but as a reminder. History hides in quiet places, and sometimes it waits patiently. Years later, when legal settlements finally redistributed portions of the riverfront profits to displaced families, Robert Harris attended a press conference. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't celebrate. He simply said, "We weren't crazy. It really happened." And that mattered, because for decades, those families were told their memories were wrong, that the relocations were coincidence, that the inspections were routine, until a notebook proved otherwise. The Whitlock name still exists, but it no longer carries unquestioned admiration. It carries complexity, debate, a reminder that power can shape cities. But paper can reshape power. All because one afternoon, in a quiet attic, a box was opened, and the day her secret records were found, a legacy began to collapse. Behind every birth, she wrote the truth, and the truth was dangerous. This one will feel darker, more intimate, more psychological, slower tension build, deep emotional weight, very human. Let's begin. Every time a baby cried, she wrote something down. Not just the time. Not just the weight. Not just the mother's condition. She wrote what she saw. And what she saw was not what the town believed. For years, no one noticed the extra line in her notebook, until the night someone came looking for it. The town of Briar Hollow sat between cornfields and long stretches of empty highway in southern Indiana. One hospital, one church, one sheriff, and one midwife everyone trusted. Her name was Ruth Keller. She was not dramatic, not political, not loud. She had delivered more than half the town's population over 30 years. If you were born in Briar Hollow before 1995, chances are Ruth held you first. She was known for her calm presence, her soft voice, her steady hands. But what no one knew was that Ruth had stopped trusting the hospital. It started in 1987. A 16-year-old girl named Lily Monroe arrived at Ruth's door in the middle of a thunderstorm, barefoot, crying, 8 months pregnant. "I can't go to the hospital," Lily whispered. "They'll tell my father." Ruth had heard that fear before. Small towns remember everything. So she brought Lily inside. The birth was long but safe. A baby girl, healthy, strong. Ruth cleaned the child, wrapped her carefully, and placed her in Lily's shaking arms. Then headlights appeared outside the house. 2 cars. One belonged to Sheriff Dalton, the other to Dr. Vernon Hale, the town's only physician. Ruth felt her stomach tighten. She stepped outside before they knocked. "She's not ready for visitors," Ruth said firmly. Sheriff Dalton avoided her eyes. "Dr. Hale received a call," he said. "The family wants the situation handled properly." Handled properly. Ruth knew what that meant. In Briar Hollow, teenage pregnancies didn't make headlines. They disappeared. Dr. Hale stepped forward. "We have a facility in Louisville prepared to assist," he said smoothly. "The baby will have a better future." Ruth held her ground. "The baby has a mother," she replied. Dr. Hale's expression hardened slightly. "Not for long," he said. That night, Lily signed papers she barely understood. By morning, the baby was gone. Adoption paperwork processed through Hale's private connections. Closed file. Confidential. The town never spoke about it again, but Ruth wrote it down. Date. Mother. Baby. Removed under pressure. It was the first time she added a second column in her birth ledger. Truth. Over the next decade, the pattern repeated. Not often. Just enough. Young mothers from strict families. Girls from struggling homes. Women whose husbands had recently died. Dr. Hale would appear within hours of delivery, offering solutions. Out-of-state adoptions, private arrangements, fresh starts. And every time Ruth wrote what she saw, some mothers agreed willingly. Some didn't, but pressure in small towns is quiet and heavy. Bank loans denied. Rumors spread in church. Parents threatened with social disgrace. The babies left, and the official hospital records listed them as transferred to certified agencies. Clean. Legal. Approved. Ruth's personal ledger told a different story. Behind every birth, she wrote the truth, and the truth was dangerous. In 1996, a new nurse arrived at Briar Hollow Hospital. Her name was Emily Torres, fresh out of nursing school. Curious, idealistic. She noticed something strange during her first month. Several birth records were incomplete, files marked confidential without explanation. She asked Dr. Hale about it. Private adoptions. He answered promptly. Best not to pry. But Emily kept prying. That's how she found Ruth. They met at a church fundraiser. Emily approached her carefully. You've delivered most of these babies, haven't you? She asked. Ruth smiled gently. Most. Do you keep records? Yes. Do they match the hospitals? Ruth paused, because silence had protected her for nearly 10 years. But she had grown tired of carrying the weight alone. No, she said softly. They don't. That was the first crack. Ruth invited Emily to her home one evening. She retrieved the leather ledger from a locked kitchen drawer. Not hidden, just protected. Emily flipped through the pages slowly. Each entry was precise, clinical, but the added notes told a different story. Mother crying, refused signature initially. Sheriff present during consent. Payment envelope observed. Emily's face drained of color. This isn't legal, she whispered. It's organized, Ruth corrected. They both understood the difference. Dr. Hale had built a reputation as Briar Hollow's pillar of healthcare. He funded the hospital expansion, sponsored school events, donated to campaigns. He wasn't just a doctor. He was infrastructure, and infrastructure does not fall easily. But evidence creates gravity, and gravity eventually pulls everything down. That Emily contacted a state health compliance officer anonymously. An audit was scheduled quietly. When investigators arrived, hospital staff scrambled. Files were locked. Cabinets reorganized. But Ruth had already copied her ledger. 3 full photocopies stored in separate places. Because she knew, once you step forward, you cannot step back. The audit uncovered discrepancies. Signatures dated before births, consent forms missing witness verification, transfer documents processed through a single out-of-state agency repeatedly tied to Hale. The state launched a formal investigation. News spread slowly at first. Then faster. Former mothers began calling the hospital, asking questions, demanding records. Some had believed their babies were sent to loving families. Others had always felt something wasn't right. One woman, now in her 40s, came forward publicly. They told me I wasn't stable enough, she said through tears. But they never evaluated me. They just decided. DNA testing services had become common by then. Several young adults in Louisville discovered their birth origins traced back to Briar Hollow. The pattern was undeniable. Dr. Hale was arrested in 1998 on charges of coercion and illegal adoption facilitation. Sheriff Dalton retired quietly before questioning began. The hospital board claimed ignorance. But ignorance doesn't erase impact. The town felt different after Lar. Quieter, ashamed. Some residents defended Hale. He helped families, they argued. Others finally admitted what they had suspected for years. That power had been misused. Ruth testified calmly. She didn't dramatize. She didn't accuse. She simply read from her ledger. Behind every birth, she wrote the truth. And in a courtroom, truth sounds different. Sharper, unavoidable. That Dr. Hale lost his medical license. Several adoptions were legally reviewed. Some families chose to reconnect. Others chose distance. Healing is not uniform. One evening, long after the trial ended, Emily asked Ruth something she had wondered since the beginning. Weren't you afraid? Ruth nodded slowly. Every time, she said. Then, why keep writing it down? Ruth looked at her hands. Hands that had delivered hundreds of children into the world. Because memory fades, she said quietly. And power relies on fading memory. She closed the ledger gently. But ink doesn't fade so easily. Ruth retired shortly after. No parade, no public recognition. Just a quiet life in a small white house. Years later, when she passed away peacefully in her sleep, former mothers attended her funeral. Some brought children who had found their way back home. Others brought photographs of children they never saw again. They didn't blame Ruth. They thanked her. Because without her record, there would have been no proof. Without proof, there would have been no justice. And without justice, the silence would have continued. In Briar Hollow, new babies are still born. New records are kept. But now, oversight exists. Transparency exists. Because once a dangerous truth is exposed, it becomes harder to bury the next one. Behind every birth, she wrote the truth. For years, no one cared what she wrote, until the truth became evidence, and evidence became consequence, and consequence changed everything. She knew what the powerful wanted buried, and she wrote it down. This one will feel darker, sharper, and suspenseful. Think corporate intrigue, psychological tension, and slow burning danger. Full cinematic, human, U.S. audience tone. Killer hook included. That the first time she realized just how far the powerful would go to hide the truth, she almost ran. Almost. But she didn't. She kept writing. Because some truths demand ink, and some people can't be trusted to remember. It started in 1992, in a sleek downtown office of Halstead Technologies, a company so big it dominated the city's skyline. Its name was on buildings, on conferences, on charity events. Its CEO, Richard Halstead, was revered as a visionary, polished, impeccable, untouchable, and everyone wanted to be on his side, except one woman, Claire Bennett, corporate auditor, 28, methodical, observant, quiet. She had joined Halstead Technologies fresh out of college, eager, ambitious, and naive. She learned quickly. The company didn't just produce software. It produced influence, favor, silence. Some deals weren't recorded in accounting books. Some memos were shredded. Some errors conveniently disappeared. The first anomaly appeared in a client file, a payment labeled consulting services. For $250,000, no consultant existed, no memo explained it. The client, a small family-run manufacturer, had never requested anything beyond software installation. Claire asked. She was told it was proprietary strategy. Confidential. Not for auditors. She noted it anyway. Weeks passed. Patterns emerged. Employee expense reimbursements without receipts. Off the books bonuses paid to unknown recipients. Legal settlements quietly paid, with gag orders attached. Each time, Claire wrote it down. Ink on paper. Ledger after ledger. Not digital. Not traceable. Safe from corporate servers. Because the powerful want control. The powerful want everything electronic. Paper is stubborn. She realized she had stumbled onto a system, a network of influence that protected misdeeds. Protecting their image, protecting wealth, protecting themselves, and anyone who challenged it disappeared, not physically, but professionally. Fired, blacklisted. Forgotten tipping point came in early 1993. Halstead Technologies acquired a small biotech firm. The deal was celebrated publicly as innovation for the city. A press release, photos of Richard smiling, champagne flowing. Claire was assigned to audit the integration. Documents told one story. Reality told another. Lab equipment was transferred to the parent company. Samples vanished. Scientists received non-disclosure reminders. But the most troubling part was the human part was some employees were encouraged to leave. Some were subtly threatened. Others were paid quietly to stay silent about experiments that hadn't been approved by regulatory boards. Claire's hands shook as she wrote everything down. Names, dates, payments, warnings, emails, meetings. The ledger was becoming a map. Months passed. Her career thrived externally. Everyone thought Claire was compliant, loyal, ambitious. Inside, she was terrified. Every day she walked the office floors. She imagined her notebooks being discovered. She imagined Halstead discovering her curiosity. And yet, she kept writing, because knowing what the powerful want buried is dangerous. And she had seen firsthand what happens when no one notices. By mid-1994, the pattern became undeniable. Projects labeled "proved" were not. Safety violations were rewritten as minor incidents. Contractors were bribed. Regulators missiled. Every ledger she filled connected the dots. It was a web of calculated deception. And she had every thread. The moment of truth arrived unexpectedly. Halstead Technologies was planning a shareholder meeting. The CEO would announce a billion-dollar acquisition. Public celebrations. News cameras. Investors salivating. Claire attended as usual. Nobody suspected she carried 3 full notebooks in her bag, carefully wrapped in acid-free paper. She sat in the back row, watching, listening, taking mental notes. And then she made a decision. The company had spent years covering mistakes, covering violations, covering crimes disguised as business strategy. The powerful were untouchable publicly. But she held proof privately. She left the meeting early, went to a local newspaper, met with investigative journalist Marcus Lane. "Do you know what you have?" he asked after scanning the first few pages. "I know what the public doesn't," Claire replied. And for the first time, she smiled. Publication was careful, strategic, no leaks, no social media posts. Marcus wrote the story meticulously, including evidence without revealing Claire's identity. Off the books payments to executives, misrepresentation of acquisitions, employee intimidation, regulatory violations hidden for years. The headline ran, "Corporate Empire Built on Silence as Secrets Exposed at Halstead Technologies." Immediately, chaos erupted. Shareholders demanded explanations. Regulators arrived within hours. Journalists began digging deeper. Board members resigned. Investigations opened. Public confidence crumbled. The empire was shaken, and all because someone knew what the powerful wanted buried and wrote it down. Claire never sought recognition. She stayed anonymous for years. That she continued her work quietly in finance, but the city knew change was possible. Employees were no longer afraid. They had seen evidence of courage. The CEO, Richard Halstead, never went to jail, but his reputation suffered irreparable damage. Investments stalled. Partnerships dissolved. The empire no longer seemed untouchable. The truth had weight. The ledger remained. Evidence. Proof. Reminder. And Claire knew something important. Power cannot survive unchecked when someone notices. The powerful want secrets buried. But stubborn ink refuses